So the question becomes, do you agree or disagree with that notion or that statement? We can start with, okay, yep, yes.
So that's an easy one.
Okay.
100% agree with that statement because first of all, we have to realize the law is a single axis lens. In other words, it's looking at everything through a gender lens, not
Mhm.
focusing on that intersection of gender and race. And so when you think about the benefits that are being provided, Dr. Flowers mentioned that, and Dr. Forrester Scott also made comments about some of the benefits. These are protections, sexual harassment, discrimination,
Mhm.
parents with married individuals, parenting students. That protection is based on sex, not based on that intersection. So you do have a lot of Black women who are not getting the same benefits of the law because the experiences that we experience is not just based on sex. It's
Mhm.
based on that intersection. And so
Mhm.
we wholeheartedly are not receiving the same benefits that white women receive.
Very good. Okay. Dr. Flowers.
I definitely have to agree with everything that Dr. McDowell just said. When we're looking at Title IX as a single access lens, we really have to understand that it is doing so much. And so Title IX right now is being used to, in the court systems, to convey sexual harassment. Look at discrimination with transgender. Look at everything under the umbrella that is shaking hands with the idea of gender, sexuality, identity. And so when we look at it from that vein, we have to understand that it only has certain limits. And then we take it a step further and we understand that when the law even came about, we didn't have all of the identity definitions that we have now. And we were really just now understanding what sex was in regards of identity. And
Mhm.
so with it being in that frame, we have to say, is Title IX the vehicle that can provide protection as it is and as it's written? No, it can't. Because as Dr. McDowell says, it's a single access lens and it does not at all contribute to race discrimination. And so
Right.
Black women in sport in that respect who receive discrimination simultaneously through sex and discrimination and racial discrimination will not be protected under Title IX, the same way our white female counterparts are.
Right. And that's such an interesting, and I just wanted to share that my dissertation was on gender discrimination, the perception of African-American women, coaches and athletic administrators, their perception of gender discrimination and alongside racial discrimination, how did we perceive it? And it was different, it was qualitative study. And what was so interesting about it was that the resounding theme was, it's difficult for us to embrace Title IX. It was difficult to embrace gender discrimination and to have those conversations because we were fighting for the same rights that, the male counterparts were regarding racial discrimination. So it was difficult for them to kind of really embrace it. And so I found that those responses were quite interesting. And I can understand why it was hard for them to embrace sometimes the whole, that the whole aspect of just gender alone, just focusing on the gender alone, right? So that was really good. Anybody else would like to add to that? Any other thoughts?
I would just add one thing, Dr. Nelson,
Yes.
because this also goes back to when I mentioned before how they had that busing provision in there,
Mhm.
because you're definitely right. Now, all of a sudden, there's this controversy. We're focusing on gender. And they actually said at that time, when it came out, like in the newspapers, the whole focus was on busing. And so a lot of people didn't even pay attention to Title IX. So
Right.
it passed without a lot of issues because the focus was on busing. So now they actually said that's the most controversial aspect. So at the
Right.
time in 1972 was the busing issue,
Mhm.
but now it's the issue of gender equity.
Right. Absolutely. Excellent. Okay, so let's go with, now we've talked about, obviously Title IX has been gender equity, and the focus has not necessarily been on racial equity. How at this point, in what ways do Black women not benefit from Title IX the same way that their white peers do? We know that that we don't, but give some examples. In what ways is that the case? Dr. Forster Scott. Yes.
So it becomes quite obvious when you start looking at, well, where do Black females mostly attend schools? And if you look at the places where they mostly attend schools, many of those schools don't even offer sport or athletic programming. And if they do, it's very limited. So that's one place to take a look. We also see that at the high school level, that Black girls are twice as likely to drop out of sport. So even if they do start participating in sport, they're more likely to drop out of it due to, a number of reasons. That could be something like transportation issues, aftercare, school aftercare issues. They may be responsible for caring for younger siblings or someone else in the family. The commitment that may be involved, where they may not have the support that's needed in order for them to make practices, make competitions, everything that goes along with being an athlete. So again, just looking at that. And then when we get to the collegiate level, we see that sports that Black females have traditionally participated in, like basketball and track and field, where most schools have those programs, we have sports that are growing, sports that are considered emerging sports like rowing, equestrian, and those are sports that typically Black females don't have opportunity and access to. So that's benefiting white females, particularly middle and upper class white females, whereas the rates of participation in sports for Black females have either declined or stagnated. And right now, the opportunities for them to continue participating beyond high school decreases even further.
Wow, that's good. Yes, Dr. Flowers.
So I'm going to piggyback on what my colleague, Dr. Forster Scott, just shared, which was phenomenal. I think it's extremely impactful to understand that sometimes visually, especially as we have Final Four going on, and we're seeing so many visually Black women play, there's this idea that we're in the space, but we're still struggling. And so leading what Dr. Forster Scott introduced, which is talking about country club sports, emerging sports, we have to understand that we're not in that space. And understanding the NC2A is using the emerging sports program as a catalyst to build opportunities in sport. They're also in a box, because remember, Title IX does not shake hands with racial discrimination, only sex discrimination. So these opportunities are being built based on sex opportunities. So as such, right now in the NC2A, we have acrobatics and tumbling, equestrian, rugby, triathlon, wrestling, and we just got stunt coming in January that came about. Not a lot of data available for stunt yet, obviously. But when we're looking at Black women, I pulled some data. So acrobatics and tumbling, we have 78 currently. That's across all divisions, Division I, Division II, Division III in the NC2A right now as of 2022 data. Equestrian, we have 18. Rugby, we have 78. Triathlon, we have 5. Wrestling, we have 59. And so we look at those in comparison to acrobatics and tumbling, there's 604 white women versus 78 Black women. We're really doing a disservice, and we really have to kind of push the envelope. And so again, thank you so much for having this forum, because it's through panel discussions like this that we're able to get the information out and hopefully make some changes.
Good. Ms. Brownie, yes.
Hey, yes, I just wanted to piggyback off of what Dr. Scott said and what Dr. Flowers said, because I think in these instances, race really plays a huge part. If you are going into a predominantly white sport, which I grew up playing tennis, if you go into that space where you do not feel comfortable, or you do not feel or you do not see people who look like you, that can be a deterrent why you do not want to continue that sport. I'm sure we've all seen in the news, which I've seen before, young kid, Black wrestler, was, had his braids cut, had his hair cut in the middle of a wrestling session because they told that it was a hindrance, which is completely ridiculous and bizarre. So why would that young man want to continue in that sport if he is facing racial discrimination? There was no reason for that to happen. I even experienced it myself growing up here in the state of Arizona, where I was like one of 3 Black girls playing in this section, the Southwest section. I was able to feel like I could continue because at that time, I was like 7, 8 years old, and Venus and Serena were like 14, 15 years old. So it was good seeing that representation. Also goes into the fact that representation really does matter. That's why you're seeing an influx of Black gymnasts. Fisk University now has a, Black they have a gymnastics team now because of Simone Biles and Gabby Douglas and, gymnasts before them. So race plays such a huge, I just want to piggyback off of what they said, because race itself, I think, just plays such a huge factor in why some of these sports you don't see more people that look like us in them because of the circumstances that they're going into and that space where they don't feel safe. Why would a young man want to continue wrestling when his braids are cut, right before he's about to wrestle? Why not stick with what traditionally, which it shouldn't have to be, but go into sports where we feel comfortable, basketball and track. And it shouldn't be that way. We should be able to branch out and do different types of sports, but race really has, I think, played a critical piece.
That's a point. Great point. Dr. Foister, Scott.
Yeah, so I want to say 2 quick things. One is to not underestimate the significance of Black women's hair when it comes to sport participation, and why hair will matter in terms of what types of physical activity that Black women will choose to participate in or not participate in. So that can be an entire conversation on its own. The other thing I wanted to point out, just to give some numbers here for people who are listening, this is from the NCAA. This is women's participation by race for all divisions, Division 1, 2, and 3 combined. So again, when we see track and field athletes and we see basketball athletes, because those are sports, particularly women's basketball, happens to be one of the more televised sports for women. And that's another conversation because women's sports receive less than 4% of the coverage. But when we do see them, we see basketball and we see that there's a high representation of Black females in basketball. And then people equate that with Black women being successful or having that type of representation in all sports, when that's completely false. The reality is that 77% of all female athletes are white female athletes. Black female athletes only make up 10% of NCAA athletes, 10%. Okay, and the numbers are even lower for Hispanic and Asian women. So this idea that somehow Black women are represented across the board in different sports is really completely false. We just happen to be we happen to be more represented in sports like basketball, women's basketball.
That's a good point. Right. And it's interesting that you also brought up about Black young ladies, how they're wearing their hair now with the long eyelashes. Is that a form of discrimination? Now there's a lot of conversation, discussion about whether or not that's distracting. Is it a more of a distraction? Should they be allowed to wear the long hair and the different color hair and the eyelashes? So is that a form of discrimination?
I believe they should show up however they feel comfortable showing up as themselves, whether it's the eyelashes, the colored hair. I think Black women, we've always had a sense of style that was ours, and we need to be able to participate in sport, representing us how we see fit in terms of how we, if you look at people like FloJo, she had those long fingernails, she had the long hair, she had, and she received a lot of criticism for that. Even today, Serena Williams still receives criticism for her outfits, the things that she chooses to wear. So I think that's part of the territory of being a Black female athlete. When you do receive, a lot of attention through media coverage and so forth. But I just I personally believe that if a female wants to wear her hair in braids, she could wear her hair in braids. If she wants to rock her afro, she should be able to rock her afro. If she wants to wear, however she wants to wear her hair is how she wants to wear her hair, and she should be able to do that.
Yeah. Very good. I believe Dr. McDowell, well, I thought I had somebody else, but yes, Dr. McDowell, yes.
Because I wholeheartedly agree with what Dr. Forster Scott said, and it reminded me of the whole issue with the swimming cap. So you now have a sport that doesn't have a high percent of Black females participating in it. Someone makes a cap so that with our natural hair with braids, and then what did the Olympics do? At first trying to say no. So another barrier. So you're right with that hair issue, it's important. And so found a way to get over that and then still faced another barrier to prevent Black women from being able to participate when it did not give them an advantage in the sport.
Right. And all I can think about with tennis and with Serena, Venus and Serena, right? That was a very traditional, that's a very traditional sport. Right, Tori. And for them to come in and break that barrier with their own design of uniforms, how they were going to dress, and to be intentional about, this is how I'm representing me, this is how I'm showing up. And at some point, now that I'm looking at tennis, I see them wearing all kinds of clothes now. That they really broke some barriers there, and changed some things as it relates to tennis. Would you agree with that, Tori or Miss Browning?
No, I would completely agree. They changed everything. They changed the way women train for the sport. They changed the way women play the sport. They literally changed everything. And I think what people didn't like was, most of the girls that they were playing against, or grew up against, had the fancy, country club where they played at, these coaches, this and that, and they come in there and completely just start dominating. And it's like the audacity of you to come in, wear your hair in braids and beads, and be who you are, your authentic self, and you're coming in and you're beating everybody easily, It's like the audacity, And so I always still say to this day, I'm like, they got the last laugh, because the way the sport is played now is 100% due to them. People had to raise their game, their level, everything that they were doing because of them. And they paved the way for other sports as well. That's why now you see more Black males and females in the sport, still not where it needs to be, but you see a lot more. Like the Coco Gauffs and the Naomi Osakas and the Frances Tiafoes, they all looked to them as the, as the idol. And it's spread into other sports. That's just like for me, when I was young, I didn't see a lot of other Black tennis players growing up, and seeing them, on TV was huge for me. And that's why I always say representation really matters. It's extremely important.
Excellent. Teresa, I want to get you involved here. I got a question for you. What advice would you give Black female athletics or athletes today as they seek to play sports in high school and in college? I know that you played in high school and in college. And so what advice would you give them today when they're looking to do that?
My advice for young folks is to have a vision for what they want for themselves. I have a brief story. I'm from a family of 7, which we all know, socioeconomics. We were considered underprivileged based on socioeconomics. So I would like for them to understand the importance of dreaming, have a vision for themselves, dream big, work hard, give your best, but give your best, whatever their best is, but often work hard to be better, if that makes sense. I also would like for them to learn how to support their teammates, build relationships, be able to communicate their needs and their wants. And if someone is making them feel uncomfortable, it's okay to say that they're uncomfortable. If they're having any challenges, it's okay to talk about the challenges that they experience and be able to communicate certain things for themselves. But lastly, I would like to leave with them being able to persevere. Perseverance is big. It allows our ancestors to endure, succeed, and overcome, and just know that they can overcome anything and also continue to persevere.
I have a question for you also. Dawn Staley has been making a lot of statements. She's using her platform to really make a lot of statements. And most recently, she on the sideline, she wore a Cheyney University jersey. And I was super excited to see that. And she spoke out about Brittany Griner, and I mean, whatever she's very passionate about that she thinks needs to be, talked about, or she can use her voice to make a change. She certainly does that. My question to you is, what does that mean to you, a coach using her platform of such status as Dawn Staley? You're talking about a former professional athlete. You're talking about a Nike representative, former Nike representative, professional athlete, now a two-time, getting ready to be three-time national champion. And so what does that mean to you to see a coach of basketball like that with Dawn Staley using her platform for social justice and to make a difference and to really help even people that aspire to become coaches, using her platform to help them navigate that terrain? What does that mean to you?
I think it means to me, it means hope. She's given people to really have different thought process on where they could be and where they actually can go. So for me, it's a different form of hope for our community. And that's what it means to me.
Absolutely. All right. So we're looking at a conversation. We're having these discussions. Anybody else want to chime in? I know I just went off a little bit, but I think this still has some connection to what we're talking about, because we're still talking about women paving the way and making a difference. Dr. Flowers, I want to come to you with a specific question. We talked about tennis, and certainly Ms. Browning has shared with us about how Venus and Serena have changed the face of tennis. But we're going to talk about golf now. And you recently co-authored a Women's Sports Foundation report, 50 years of Title IX. We are not done yet. And in the report, it states that Title IX is unable to provide protection and or participation opportunities for Black women in golf as it does for white women. Can you expound on that for us, please?
Yeah, the report really looked at the single access lens of Title IX. And in that vein, we really took a deep dive look at sports opportunities for Black women. And I'm glad to say, what we found from that is there is more of a need to look at the high school level to see what's going on. And so bringing that notion all together with golf is in a space of, we really need some help. Visually, because of the culture of golf, we still struggle, those that are outside of golf, to see it as a space that's accepting of race. But those inside know that we're struggling even more to have it a space accepting of race and gender. And so we're talking about a sport, just to give you a little background, that still has doors closed to women in some membership places and in some prominent tournaments and in some restrictive clubs. We're still in a space where women can be aggressively having to fight for their right to be on the course. We're in a space where we walk onto the course and we immediately do not feel like we're invited. And unfortunately, we're seeing that landscape even in HBCU system. I played golf at Mississippi Valley State years ago in the 90s, and my program isn't there anymore. And so as these programs are leaving the HBCU system, and we know that the PWI system is not opening the doors and saying, hey, Black girls, come play, we have to see where those opportunities are. I've been trying to be an advocate to help athletic departments understand that golf does so much more than just provide opportunities for Black women, that it's really a scholastic, academic excellence, leadership pipeline as well. Because when you look at it, you look at women's basketball, we have to understand that, yes, there's a Dawn Staley, but there was a pipeline for her from being a student athlete to then going on to having a professional career, then finding a leadership position. And in golf, we don't have that. And so there's a need to actually bring that back. So the current landscape right now in the HBCU system, especially for golf, is dire. Around my years, just to bring it full circle, there was a matriculation of a lot of international students to the golf rooms. And then we saw the media take the stories where we have what they coin all white teams, winning national minority golf championships. And so again, we have to understand with all of these challenges that we're facing, not even bringing in the financial challenges that HBCUs are facing, there's a great need for us to have the conversation to try to bring golf back to the HBCU system.
Okay. Dr. Forster Scott, yes.
I just wanted to add to what Dr. Flowers was saying, and spend a little time talking about athletic budgets, and the seriousness of where we are as a country when it comes to how we set aside money for athletic program in our school systems. Oftentimes, the athletic budgets are on a chopping block where they start reducing programs. And one of the things that we're seeing increase is this whole idea of pay to play. So that if you want your child to participate in sport and you're in a public school that has a pay to play system, you have to pay money. And this is something that's taking place across the country, and it's having an impact on the type of sports that people are able to access and participate in. The other thing is looking at ways in which we can continue to promote sport participation for females and not lose sight of the benefits of sport participation, particularly when it comes to females and self-esteem issues. When it comes to graduation rates, we know that oftentimes sport participants tend to graduate at higher rates from high school. They're less likely to get into trouble. So we need to focus on some of the positive benefits outside of just the physicality of sport, but some of the additional benefits as well to continue to encourage female participation in sports. And again, looking at the pathways, not only as an athlete, but for careers in sport. That's one of the things that I'm pretty passionate about is exposure to careers in sport outside of being an athlete and even outside of being a coach, that these avenues do exist, but people have to know that they're there and they have to be familiar or have some type of way of accessing the information so that they'll know that these are actual options for them.
Very good. Two raised hands. Oh, Dr. McDowell, yes.
I just want to follow up quickly on something that Dr. Forster Scott said. This whole pay to participate, that's a big issue, because if we look at what's going on in US society, we have a wealth gap of 1 to 6. They say that goes back to what we had in the 80s. So we are not seeing a lot of improvement between that wealth gap between Black Americans and white Americans. And so that translates when you're looking at excess money that you have to be able to support your child doing some of these country club sports, these emerging sports. So we are definitely having this disparate impact on a lot of different levels, from the race, from the socioeconomic class status, from discrimination that we're seeing in society.
Excellent. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to add to that, you know, there's this perception that, you know, sport participation is increasing. And in many instances, it's not so much that it's increasing, it's that the people who can afford to play sport are spending more money on sport. But in reality, sport participation is decreasing because families don't have that discretionary money to put into sport programs. And so when we start seeing youth travel teams, and that's the only way that you can get access to recruiters and college scholarships. But then you have families that can't afford to pay these fees to belong to travel teams or club sports. And the only outlet they may have are local recreation programs, but those local recreation programs don't have the same level of training and preparedness to get people from, you know, the local community into, you know, a Division I scholarship or something like that. And so again, that's another disparity that we're looking at. Many of the avenues we used to have when we were, when segregation was the way of, you know, we had our own sport leagues, a lot of those programs were lost. So we may have to return to some type of, developing our own leagues. When we talk about collegiate sport, rarely do you hear people talking about MEAC or CIAA. It's always NCAA, but we have MEAC and we have CIAA, and we need to support those institutions as well and make sure that people know that they exist and that those sport programs are still around.
Yeah, very good. Excellent. Yep. Dr. McDowell?
Sorry but I have to make a plug for the Black Women in Sport Foundation, because everything that was said, that is what we believe in. That's our mission. That's our value, is we're providing these sport opportunities for free, because that way there is not that financial barrier in Philadelphia for the ones who can get in these sport programs that we offer in the summer. They don't have that barrier, and it's introducing them to non-traditional sports, to fencing, to lacrosse, to tennis, because you are right. A lot of kids don't have that. And so it even goes back to that question that was asked earlier, what advice would you give, Black females? My advice, not just to the kids, but to the parents. Are you introducing your child to non-traditional sports?
Sure.
Are you looking at what resources your city has to offer? Because what's happening now, if we're looking at this racial clustering, we're competing against ourselves for these scholarships. We're trying to get basketball scholarships. We're trying to get track and field scholarships. So we're competing against ourselves for a few scholarships. So that's the advice that I would definitely give a lot of people, is that we have to start branching out and looking at other opportunities that we have.
Right. And I just want to comment that was made in the chat from one of the members in the audience. I'm going to come right to you, Hamlet. I'm going to come right to you. But there was a comment that was made about Philadelphia high schools are in bad shape, right? And so I'm assuming that this probably has a lot to do with resources, perhaps exposure, quality coaches, budgets. As Dr. Forrester Scott, that has a great deal to do with just resources. Any thoughts about opportunities, how the sport programs that are lacking in resources, yet we know that we definitely need to keep our young people involved in sports? Any feedback or any strategies or perhaps things that we should consider doing when you're in situations where the youth aren't getting the opportunities in sport, structured sport, to help them grow and develop their skill sets? And I know that the Black Women in Sport Foundation definitely does exactly what Dr. McDowell did, because I used to be that intern that used to go to all those schools and teach all those those non-traditional sports. So definitely. But anyone else? Yes, I'm going to come to Ms. Hamlet. Yes.
So I think the program, and I'm sorry if I mispronounced, the sports organization that Dr. McDowell has, we need more programs like that in Philadelphia. So I don't know where we could start, if we could try to get more politicians involved to buy in, to know that there's a need, although they're cutting a lot of programs out of schools, especially with the instruments and the music. But somewhere we have to get the politicians involved and find some resources and monies to go into these schools and have these programs and put it, even if it's just an after school program to be offered. They offering a lot of STEM programs, but from a sports perspective, that those things are not being offered in the schools. So if we all could get some kind of legislation to buy in, that's what we would have to do, which is a whole nother conversation, but I thought I would just put that out there.
That's good. Dr. Forrester Scott.
Well, we haven't really touched upon name, image, likeness issues yet. And I just want to, make sure we get around to that, because this is a new frontier. And this is something that we can, if we understand it, if we are effective at utilizing it, this can be something that could be groundbreaking for our community. For all the years where, I want to say something, Jay-Z's coming to mind, for all the years that y'all know what I'm talking about. I know some of you do. Anyway, yeah, so name, image, likeness, I think, is an opportunity for us to address some of these inequities, but we have to equip ourselves with the knowledge of what we can and cannot do and how we can use this, whether we're starting at the high school level, the collegiate level, but just understanding that this is an opportunity for us to finally make some money outside of getting collegiate scholarships, because particularly for women who don't necessarily have professional sports to look to once their collegiate careers are over. So again, knowing what the guidelines are, and they do differ from state to state, understanding the impact that Title IX or the role that Title IX should be playing when it comes to name, image, and likeness. Right now, there are some females who are benefiting from name, image, likeness deals, but that's something that individually you're going to have to figure out how to work it, even though you do have some systems at the college level where they're collectively working together to help these athletes get these type of deals. And that's where Title IX is going to have to play a significant role to make sure that the female athletes are given the same access and opportunity as male athletes when you have the college institutions involved in trying to help set up these type of NIL deals.
Right. And I'm glad you embarked. That was our next question, the NIL, name, image, and likeness. This is quite a controversial conversation. It was before they passed it, and now it still is. Who is it benefiting? Is it, and where does this take our sports that's supposed to be amateuristic, the amateur sports, right? So Dr. Flowers, I know that this is one area of expertise for you as well.
To give a little bit of background just for those who aren't familiar with what it is. And so when we're talking about name, image, likeness, we're talking about college athletes now having the ability to get paid for their name, their image. When we're talking about image, think about Michael Jordan, the iconic legs extended, arms out dunking. That's his image. And looking at the likeness, anything from if you're on a basketball court, that distinctive dunk shot that you have, a distinctive run, all of that is going to be classified as your image. I sit on the advisory board of SPRI, which is a third-party facilitator for name, image, likeness. We work as hard as we can to provide college athletics, departments, even high school athletics. Let me dare say that, because name, image, likeness is in high school athletics as well now. Just to help to be a facilitator. The NC2A is not doing a great job with laying out the ground rules of what it is, even though we do know we got our first penalty. If you could call it a penalty, that's for another session, but if you guys have questions, I could go into it. There are state legislations across the board. There's also some federal legislations that the NC2A is pushing, obviously with the Power 5, that gives them a little bit more of a hold on it. One of the main things that the NC2A has mandated is that there has to be some sort of financial literacy component of it, meaning those third parties have to facilitate that. We at SPRI have been working just to provide the student athletes a couple of things. To us, education is important. A lot of students that are entering into these deals don't understand that, hey, I'm getting money and I have to also pay taxes. And for some students, that's also impactful on your financial aid. And dare I even say, which is even more controversial, some student athletes are entering into sponsorship deal agreements that are impacting their draftability in professional sports. We're seeing that a lot right now in football. And so just educating them on what it is, educating them on if you have a sponsorship deal that clashes with your institutional sponsorship deal, how do you manage that? For Black women, I have argued that name, image, likeness gives us a space to do something that Title IX couldn't. It gives us the space to promote ourselves. And so Black women in golf now can go to the mom and pop restaurant and say, hey, I'll be the face of your restaurant and get paid for it through publication of their own, through social media. This generation that's coming up that's in college athletics understands social media more than my generation ever will. And they're using that as a vehicle to get to publicize themselves past what their institutions are doing. And so for me, arguably, this is a game changer for women in sport. This is definitely a game changer for women of color in sport, because it gives us level playing field to be able to get just as much sponsorship deals if the NC2A decides to play nicely and we stop marketing athletes like we're not supposed to.
Excellent. Great. Well, I was giving a notice that we need to wrap up our questions for the panelists. Any other final thoughts before we just kind of wrap up? I do want to acknowledge Dr. Nikki Frank is in the audience. So certainly she is co-founder of the Black Women in Sport Foundation, just retired as the fencing coach at Temple University. I mean, I can run her resume down. It's impeccable and certainly a trailblazer, like Professor Tina Sloan Green. So excited to have her here. Any final thoughts before we bring closure to our panel discussion? Yes, Dr. McDowell.
So when we're thinking about, some of these things that could help women get equity, like Dr. Flowers mentioned, we also need to look to the Olympics. And are they actually supporting sports starting at the grassroots level all the way to the elite level?
That's a good
So
point.
that's definitely a factor that we need to start looking at and getting that support from those levels.
I would just like to add that we need to pay more attention what's happening in our school boards, because they make a lot of the decisions at the K through 12 level and what happens with athletic programming. So we need to pay attention. And with some of these laws that are trying to be passed right now, it's scary out there. Some of the things that they're trying to roll back, some of the protections that fall under Title IX. So we need to pay attention at our local school boards, as well as what's happening nationally when it comes to Title IX and what some politicians are trying to do in rolling back some of the protections of Title IX.
That's good. All right. Any other thoughts? Yes, Dr. Flowers.
For me, just thank you to everyone who did everything that they could to get this panel discussion going. I think especially being here in Texas and realizing that we're in a space where professors are having to be very careful in their classrooms, understanding that we're in a space that we are losing our voice. It's very important that we have support of organizations like Black Women in Sports Foundation to kind of speak and advocate on our behalf and to keep this going. Unfortunately, with all of these DEI laws and anti-bans of CRT going on, we're really going to need to stick together a little bit more to try to get the voice out and try to keep everybody in a safe space.
Excellent. Okay, so that's going to wrap up. Thank you all so much. I thought this was very informative. Obviously, we brought the best of the best. The credentials were definitely evident, and your responses and the conversation. I think this is a discussion that we certainly need to continue to work. So we're so grateful and thankful for this opportunity to share our thoughts and our expertise in particular areas, in this particular area. So I believe if we have any questions in the audience, from the audience that you would like the panel to answer, perhaps. Okay, so Dr. Laura will take over questions. Okay.
Can you hear me? The video is not working, but can you hear me?
Yes.
Great, great, great. I still look gorgeous, so you don't need to see me anymore. So how is everybody this evening? And thank you all so much for this. I'm looking at the questions and the comments, and everyone is definitely talking about how informative this conversation was. One of the questions talked about Spelman, that, how do you all feel and what is your feedback regarding the athletic teams? Really, there's no support in Spelman anymore. So what do you think? Here we go with the HBC that at one time was struggling. And we know back in the old days, we called them Booster Club. That has a booster club that could really, with alumni, help those athletes. I would like to know your opinion with the panelists. One of the attendees said they would like to have your opinion on what's going on there.
Specifically to Spelman colleges?
Specifically to Spelman right now, yeah. And then we can expand it. Go ahead, Letitia, Dr. Letitia Forrest.
I'm not really familiar exactly with what's
Oh, okay.
particularly at Spelman. I can,
They've stopped all the, especially the women athletics. Is anybody familiar with it?
well, I can say in general with HBCUs,
That's good. Go ahead.
you know, we have to consider, again, budgets. And
Okay.
HBCUs, compared to PWIs, have always had struggles when it comes to budgets in athletic programming. So there's gonna, each institution has its own, I guess, issues that they may be grappling with, but we can never underestimate the significance that HBCUs have chronically and traditionally, historically have been underfunded in this country. And that has impacted athletic programming. And again, the level, when you talk about sport, unfortunately, men's sport tends to get the attention. Okay, even though Title IX has helped to increase the rates of participation for women in sport, rates of participation for men in sport still significantly outpace women. And then when you look at budgets, the budgets for men's sports are significantly disparate when compared to the budgets for women's sport, where it is significantly lower. So a lot of, again, HBCUs have a particular struggle that may be different from PWIs.
Go
And
ahead, Dr. McDowell.
yeah, so I'm aware of the situation, and I remember when it first came out, the first thing that popped in my head, if you think about it, we fund what we value. And so to me, that definitely told me at Spelman that competitive athletics wasn't valued. A lot of times when people are looking at sports, they're only thinking of the physical aspect. They're not thinking of all the other benefits that individuals get from participating in sports. So you're minimizing the impact. So you now have a great group of women at this institution, academic-wise, athletic-wise, and now you're limiting them from participating and showing all of their greatness. That's how I viewed that when I saw that, was I felt that they were limiting greatness. I understand we have budget issues, you got to make cuts, but again, to me, it's not being valued. And they're not seeing the true benefits of having competitive sports.
Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else have a comment regarding that situation or the situation in general with
I'm just gonna-
Black colleges?
In general, well, I should say regarding Spelman, again, I don't know the specifics, but I can say that I used to, when I was at Tuskegee, we played Spelman regularly on a regular basis each season, and they weren't always, they really had a focus on and sports, and the women participating in sports, and they were, I had an assistant coach to go there and coach. I grabbed my assistant coach from Spelman, and so I don't think it was always the case. Sometimes it's leadership too. Sometimes the leadership might shift and change their perspective, their philosophy, what they value, like you say. Sometimes that certainly depends. I do know COVID. We don't know about the budget and how COVID has caused people to make make some tough decisions. Unfortunately, when sports, typically when they have to make some cuts, athletics typically is usually the first one that they look at. And so that, I think, has been the case with Spelman. I think they were D3, if I can recall correctly. I think they were D3. So I think that perhaps may have played a role as well.
Great, thank you. And it really leads up to another question that Lorleen Jones asked. High school counselors are not equipped to help girls to get scholarships. We need to educate school boards and principals, etc. How do we do that? I know Letitia did talk about going to the boards, but how, in fact, boards are wonderful, but how do we get the people that are working in the weeds? How do we get them to understand and make it part of what they do with young girls?
So again, that's a resource issue, and one that I know that is across the United States, particularly in schools that serve Black children, where you have guidance counselors who are not familiar with NCAA recruitment process. They're not familiar with NCAA, the criteria in order to reach or get scholarships or, attend college. And a lot of times when you look at school counselors, where they're in schools where it's one guidance counselor to 400 kids or something like that. And many of these counselors are not sport focused at all. They're dealing with other stuff. So unless you have a parent or a coach or an athletic director who is really on top of this type of stuff, we have a lot of kids who fall through the cracks who may be talented enough and have the grades to make it to get to the next level, but because they don't know the process and don't understand the process, they're not able to meet those eligibility guidelines. So a lot of this becomes important for parents to make sure that they understand the recruitment process, understand what the eligibility requirements are, and do your homework. Do your homework and make sure you stay on top of your kid. Don't wait until they're a senior. Don't wait. Make sure if you have an interest and your kid has an interest in playing sport at the next level, that you start paying attention immediately to what these guidelines are. So by the time they get to their junior and their senior year, you've already started that process. And you cannot wait and sit back and wait for the coach to do it or the guidance counselor to do it. Because a lot of times the guidance counselors don't know the guidelines. And a lot of times the coaches are overwhelmed with a whole bunch of other stuff. And depending on where your kid goes to school, you may not have a bunch of recruiters coming over there knocking on their door. You're going to have to go out and search that stuff up on your own and put yourself in a position to take advantage of whatever opportunities may be out there.
Thank you. Teresa, you want to add to that?
Yes, and working in schools over 15 years, what I've learned is that they are not trained. So they're not learning in an undergrad. They only focus on doing scheduling. Counselors are limited on actually counseling. So I think the universities is going to have to put something in the curriculum to change it differently so they can be exposed to it in undergrad, and then they can offer the students a little more when it comes to scholarships and scholarships. I'm sorry. Yeah. So I think,
Go ahead, Letitia.
I was just going to say, one of the things that you can do if you're at the high school level and if you have any influence is to advocate to have someone in the school that is dedicated to working with the athletes. We have to think about athletes as a special population. The same way we have a special population when it comes to kids who have disabilities and special needs, athletes are a special population with particular needs. Okay, if you think about high school athletes, we're asking 14 and 15, 16, 17-year-olds to manage schedules where they're a full-time student. And if you think about the number of hours they put into a sport, we're asking these kids to manage this. Okay, it's a lot. So they're a population with special needs, and they need special counselors who are trained to work specifically with athletes to help them with academic programming, life skill programming, and the college recruitment process.
Good stuff. I saw another hand, Tori.
Yes, just to piggyback after what Dr. Scott was saying, and Teresa Hamlet, I was a former college coach before. I was a former junior tennis player trying to get into college athletics. And it really began for me, obviously, as playing juniors, but my freshman year of high school. You know, you start looking at these things. There's certain requirements that you have to have, credits. You know, I have to have this many social studies classes. I have to have this many math classes, GPA, and all of that. And it all tailors on, you know, what division you want to go to. If you're trying to do D1, D2, or D3. So it's better, as Dr. Scott was saying, get on it ahead, get on it early. Don't start your junior year, because as we know now, recruitment actually starts sophomore year now. Freshman year now. They're starting to look at kids who are in the 8th grade now. So as soon as you can get on it as early as possible, the better. And reach out to coaches. There's no, you know, that's what I did. I emailed coaches back then. Back then I used to write letters and send them off to actual coaches. Put yourself out there. The more you put yourself out there, the more exposure you're going to get. So, and if you're good, you're good. Coaches will find out, but you got to put yourself out there and you got to do the research. There's so much information now on the internet, even the NCAA.org, things like that, NCAA compliance, they can, there's just so much information out there. So put yourself out there as early as possible and get the ball rolling.
Great, thank you. Just two more questions and then we'll wrap up. And I think this is a good one. Does anyone feel like they have ever been discriminated against in sports because of their race or gender? So you have your aha story. Tori, go ahead.
Got a couple.
Which one do you want? No.
As a student athlete, as a tennis player growing up here, and even as a coach, just recently as a coach, obviously I've almost been out of college coaching for about a year, but I just go back in some of the situations where I experienced microaggressions, been called angry and aggressive for the way that I stood with my arms folded.
Wow.
I've been thought of as the trainer, right? The trainer, not the head coach. I coached men as well. And a head referee told my team right in front of me, "Oh, you got a girl as your coach?" I mean, and it's just a lot. Even growing up here, me and my family, we were quite quiet. And when I would go to junior tournaments, we didn't really say a whole lot. We interacted with people, but I didn't say a whole lot. So people automatically assumed I wasn't from this country. I was from a country in Africa and I didn't speak because I really didn't know English. Just ridiculous types of things. So 100%, especially in a sport like tennis where there wasn't a lot of Black girls playing. I even remember college, I was the only Black girl on my team. And by my senior year, I was actually the only American on my team. But thankfully, actually, my team was pretty diverse. We were international, so I didn't have any issues with my teammates. But yeah, I didn't see many Black girls playing college tennis, even when I was playing, and it's expanded now, but it's still very rare to see. But I've definitely felt it as a coach for sure. Even when I was coaching men, which is, heavily white male dominated, coaching in Division I men's tennis. So I've felt it on both sides, but you take those experiences. Unfortunately, fortunately, I would say I was not surprised by any of it. It's still shocking when it happens to you in the moment, but I was definitely not surprised. So I was able to get.
Tori. Thank you. Dr. Flowers.
I love that question. So first, thank you for raising it. I think it's something that this panel definitely, each one of us, not speaking for the other panelists, but I know we have felt. For myself as a Black woman who speaks out to advocacy for HBCUs, a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority, a person who is a leader in research that's talking about race, that's talking critically about race through sport law. Dare I say my state is racially discriminating from me, discriminating me and banning me on what I can share. I can't share my scholarship in my classes. So let's just start there to kind of talk about the landscape in Texas. As a golfer, oddly enough, not racial, but gender, yes. I am a unique person such that all my golf coaches have been African-American. I grew up playing on an African-American golf course in Detroit, Michigan. But gender discrimination is real and live. A lot of the reason why you don't know my GOATs, Renee Powell, we know Althea Gibson, do we know Larry Suggs? We don't know a lot of those pioneers is because of the gender discrimination. We know Tiger Woods, obviously, but there's still a lot of gender, sex discrimination going on in golf. So yeah, every day I walk onto the golf course, I'm facing even racial or sex discrimination.
Great, great. Anyone else want to answer that question or add their experience?
I can just say from a coach, back in the 90s, I was the only female in female women's coaching. I was the only female coach in 13 schools. And I walked into the conference room, our first meeting, and found that I was the only female sitting at the table. And it was a challenge from that day forward. So yeah, I definitely have felt the discrimination from a gender perspective.
Goodness, yes. Anyone else? Tori, I don't know if your hand is still up. Okay. Yes, Teresa.
Oh, from a gender perspective, you know, whenever we was on the road trips and we played basketball, they always said that we dated each other. And that was always a big stereotype that people had. Their perception was that all women basketball players date each other. And I think that was very uncomfortable. And it was a lack of their knowledge, not getting to know everybody, but that was a big stereotype the world had, not just men, women, everybody often said that to me. Do I date women because I played basketball?
Thought you played basketball, Mercy. Well, listen, one of the other questions, and I think most of you all really did put your information in, people really want to know how to contact you. Right, so if you've either got your LinkedIn in or your email in, could you please put it in the chat? Because people are interested in continuing this conversation. And I know Dr. Tina Sloan Green and Dr. Jermaine Edwards and Laura Reddick and Delaware Valley NCNW and myself have definitely said, this is only part one. This is only part one, because this is a conversation that has so many layers that we're definitely going to make sure we keep it going and hopefully provide some information and resources to parents and to guardians and folks who are trying to definitely get their children in school. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to pass it over to Laura so we can get ready to, she's going to introduce our president for NCNW for Del Val. And I believe Dr. Letitia Forrester Scott will be part of that to thank our partners who have made this possible tonight. When I tell you this came together in 3 weeks, yeah, really good. All right. It was something we really wanted to do. And that's why I love Tina Sloan Green, literally made a phone call and said, I want to do this. And she just, in her way, you know how Tina said, she said, okay, you know, and so it happened. You know, isn't that right, Jacqueline? She said, okay, you know, she said, okay. So I want to pass it over to Laura Reddick, who will then bring on, I don't know if I see her, Laura, our president. And if not, Laura will say goodnight for NCNW Del Val. And I'll let Letitia say goodnight for her section as well.
Oh, good evening. Actually, I did bring our president on, but I don't know if you saw that there were some questions in the question where people could write the question, and there were 2 questions that the audience had asked. Does body image have an impact on Black women athletes? And another question was, does Title IX cover transgender male, females in sports? Should a transgender male compete against females in any sports, especially track and field?
All right, we're going to answer those, but please understand we're going to be going over, and that's fine with me, because I really want to hear about the transgender piece.
Yes, and I just thought that you know, if one of those questions could be addressed, it would be great before we bring our president on, because you know it's not going to take her long to close us out, and we do have 7 minutes left to the program. Anybody want to tackle that?
I saw you grinning, Letitia. Go ahead.
So I will try and be brief on this. It's a multi-layered question. I think I forgot the first part, but I know the trans part, so I'm going to try to address that. Title IX protects gender, okay? What Title IX does not protect is I identify as. So if you are a trans athlete, you have the right to participate in sport. What Title IX does not protect is if I'm male, born male, but I identify as female, Title IX does not protect that I can compete as a female. Does that, so I hope that clarifies that. So what we're seeing now are states passing laws that state that if you are, I'm going to use trans females. If you were born male but transitioned to female, what state laws are saying or trying to pass is that you cannot compete as a female.
Mm. Good stuff. And body image. I think you all alluded to some of that, but how does body image, and someone else is going to answer that. How does in fact body image impact on female athletes, especially African American?
I'll take it. No one else is gonna. I think that's a huge, huge factor. Again, when we start looking at body types, and for Black women in particular, that's something that Black female athletes have been criticized for if their body does not fit the so-called traditional image that's associated with a particular sport. So that can be a deterrent for women, for Black girls to participate in sport. Again, just using Serena Williams as an example, a lot of the, hurtful comments, a lot of the racist comments were in relationship to her body. So again, this is something that we have to continue to reinforce within our culture, just positive affirmations. We have this traditional standard of beauty that we're constantly being measured against that doesn't necessarily respect, honor what Black beauty is in all of its facets and all of its shades and all of its everything. So yes, it definitely does play a role, and it's something that we have to be mindful of, particularly in this day and age of social media, where we are seeing higher incidences now within the Black female community. We've seen an increase in the number of or the rates of issues related to eating disorders, body dysmorphia, and so forth. So we have to be very mindful of that. And again, just making sure that we educate and that we empower our young girls to feel good about how they look in their bodies.
Great. Tori?
Just to piggyback off of that, of what she just said, not only was her body image always been a question, but because of the way she was built, she was also has been accused of doping. So being accused of doping, and there's no way she could be that good. She has to be that good too, because she's cheating. So that's another aspect of it too, how she was built, not only for her being, criticized for what she wore, but also because of her body type and how she was built and how muscular she was. She was also accused of doping and cheating. So I think that was another layer on top of that she had to deal with, which was just ridiculous.
And I would like to add to that question. Thank you, Tori. And I'm looking at Dr. Nelson. I know she was a coach. So in being a coach and working with young women, you are trying to get, accustomed to their bodies. As a coach, how would you encourage them?
Well, certainly, again, I think it's embracing your body type, right? And understanding that you don't compare yourself to anyone else, but really having them feeling comfortable in the skin that they're in and being who they are. I think that was certainly is for me very important. My thing was always, you can have some really you can have some athletes that are strong and tall and whatever, but they're able to run up and down the court and they can feel the lanes, and they may not be have a particular look, but they have capacity and the ability. So, thinking that they have to look a certain way is not always the case, right? So, again, I get my players to feel comfortable in the skin that they're in, to feel good about who they are, their image, what they look like, and that they feel good about themselves. I'm really about building self-esteem and loving self. So that's pretty much what I see as a coach.
Thank you, Dr. Nelson. Dr. McDowell, you have the last word.
So this was when Serena was still playing. And I forgot what year, and if anyone knows, please let me know. But there was a year where she was on court too. And I remember because some fans, this was at Wimbledon. some fans were surprised because they were just like, oh my gosh, I get to see Serena Williams play because she's not on court 1, she's actually on court 2. And so when they looked into it, they actually said that, or found out that image was taken into consideration. So when they were deciding what court to place players, I actually put this in an article that I wrote. It was, and I tried to pull it up, the club spokesman acknowledged that physical attractiveness was taken into consideration while assigning players to center court. So this is at Wimbledon,
Whoa.
where based off who they thought, and they kind of talked about some of the athletes as being the white females being ideal, tall, blonde, rail, thin, but Serena was referred to as Black, beautiful, and built like one of those monster trucks that crushes Volkswagens at sports arenas.
Wow.
So there are definitely issues where body image has been used to deny women access on, to show their greatness on center court, but also if we're looking at the media images that are being put out, you're seeing more white women being put in that role because of the body image.
Great. Well, listen, I want to say thank you to Dr. McDowell, to Dr. Nelson, to Tori Browning, to Dr. Forrester Scott, to Teresa Hamlet, for all your expertise tonight. This has been phenomenal. And I want to make sure we have our Juanita Jenkins, our president, come in and bid us a good evening. And Leticia, you can too as well from your section. And I don't know if Jermaine is still here with us, Laura. Is Jermaine Edwards still here?
I'm not sure, but we also want to thank Dr. Flowers as well.
Yes, I'm getting Dr. Flowers. Didn't forget you there. Up there, Flowers. So I'm going to turn it over to Juanita Jenkins, who is the president of the Delaware Valley NCNW section.
Okay, well, good evening, everyone. For whatever reason, I can't enable my camera just yet, but I want to thank you all for being with us this evening, those who were attendees and our panelists. The Delaware Valley section of NCNW has really worked over these past few years to really bring awareness to these issues that really are impacting our community. And so I can't appreciate all of you all's effort to avail your schedule to us this evening to bring and highlight these issues within our community. I think so often we continue to, we put ourselves in various boxes and say, oh, well, that's just a university thing. That's not something that impacts our community, but it does. As a whole, it impacts our community. And so I can't thank you enough on behalf of the Delaware Valley section. And I want to encourage you all to keep up the good work and continue the good fight, because there are people who are watching. There are young girls who are watching and who need to know that there are some champions here, and just continue to stay the course of who they are at their root. They need a coach like Dr. Angela Nelson, who encourages them to just be who they are and continue their own love of sports. And so without further ado, I want to thank you all, panelists, and those who have joined us for this evening as attendees.
Can we have some parting words from Dr. Jermaine Edwards and Dr. Frankie from the Black Women Sport Foundation? Unmute yourself, Jermaine.
I'd just like to say thank you to everyone who joined us this evening. Thank you to our wonderful panelists. We knew it was going to be good, but and also, as Juanita, Ms. Jenkins said, what the words that you shared with everyone, the young women who are watching, some of us older women who might want to try to get into sport who are watching, is very encouraging. And we hope to continue the conversation. And we thank all of you for sharing your experience with all of us.
Thank you, Jermaine. And Leticia, Dr. Leticia Forrester Scott from New Jersey.
My president is here, Aisha. I hate to put you on the spot, but would you
What's her name?
Aisha Simmons.
Okay, I'm gonna put her on. She should be.
Wonderful.
There she go. Wait a minute, and then I'll make it so she can come on camera. Okay, you're on. Aisha Simmons, you're on.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes.
And we can see you also.
Yes, perfect. What a wonderful night. This was an excellent panel that was put on, and the topic, I learned so much. Both of my daughters were athletes in school, and one of my in high school level, and my youngest daughter was a track athlete all through college. And a lot of the challenges and things that that different panelists brought up, we certainly experienced that as parents, and tried to coach and mentor our daughter through some of those challenges. I just want to, thank everyone for being on this call this evening and bringing conversations of this nature that are so important to our community to help educate us on how, what we need to know in order to do better and to be able to support our families and just be able to move our communities forward. So I just want to thank Dr. Letitia Forrester Scott for taking on this opportunity to be a panelist and to give us an opportunity to also co-sponsor this event. And we look forward to many more opportunities to be able to partner together to bring these sort of topics to the forefront. And what a great way to close out Women's History Month with this sort of panel.
Yes, most definitely. And I want to say thank you to everyone. I want to say thank you to my my right and left hand in doing this kind of work, who is the membership and the second VP of the Del Val National Council of Negro Women, Laura Reddick. And my name again is Doreen Lowry. I am the first VP of the Del Val, as well as the co-chair of the National Social Justice Committee, along with Dr. Letitia Forrester Scott. I drag her to everything now, poor thing. She didn't know that when she met me. And I'm going to end with the words of Serena Williams. The success of every woman should be the inspiration to another. So with that, I bid you a good night and thank you all for spending a wonderful Tuesday with us.